Okay. All right, everyone. Thanks for coming today. I'd really like to thank Ben and Veronica, most of all, for giving me this forum and allowing me to talk to you guys today about something that I think is really important and needs to be put out into the open, particularly in higher ed institutions like this one. I'd also like to thank all of you for tuning in today. I know you've had a busy few days, and you probably have about a million things on your mind getting ready for the beginning of classes on Monday. So I really appreciate you being here. My hope is that this is going to be both interactive and informative. So please, at any time, feel free to interrupt me for questions, commentary, or whatever at any time. So it was back a few weeks ago, mid-July, that I received an email from Ben and Veronica saying that my proposal to give this talk on imposter syndrome was accepted as part of the professional development days. And I have to admit that my initial thought was, holy crap, what did I get myself into, right? What the heck do I know about imposter syndrome, really? There's probably going to be people in the audience, I don't see who's here yet, but probably people in the audience who are professors and experts in psychology. Leon's right here in front of me. And here I am. I'm a molecular biologist by training. So I'm not even sure if I can spell psychology, to be honest with you. And what I found myself doing is I was having or experiencing imposter syndrome about giving a talk on imposter syndrome. And I've learned to recognize that. And I did recognize that, and I allowed myself to kind of change my perspective a little bit and say, yeah, I am the perfect person to give this talk to this audience right now. First off, I've lived it, right? I have dealt with imposter syndrome throughout my studies and my career to varying degrees in my life. And I've learned how to cope with it well. And as the ARMIS director, I come in contact, I talk to students all the time. And this is something that comes up probably more often than you would realize, our students. It runs rampant in our population. We have a lot of first generation students, non-traditional students, students that come from rural high schools that may not feel that they are prepared for college life and college level work. Ethnic minorities. There's a lot of reasons for our students to make themselves believe that they are not college material, whatever that means. And it's one of my jobs as the ARMIS director to kind of help convince them, to convince themselves that they really are college material. So I know their stories, and I can tell you firsthand and also from what they've told me, how paralyzing it can be to our students. So let me go ahead and share screen. Okay, can you all see this? Let me see if I can somehow still see you guys while I do this.
We don't see it yet, Kelly, but I want to appreciate your brave to recognize this imposter syndrome that I think all of us have suffered in any time of our career or are still suffering. So thank you for that, because it's a reflection. We are students too. So
you're very welcome. Yeah.
all of this is learning for us.
Thank you. Let me see. I gotta share screen too. There. Can you see this now?
We can see your whole desktop, Kelly, but I think once you launch your slideshow, we should be good.
Okay.
There, yeah, perfect.
Okay, excellent. I can still see you guys. I don't see my chat, so if something comes up within the chat, please let me know. Okay.
I'll keep an eye on it.
Okay, thank you. So I absolutely love this image. This is, you may be familiar with this. During COVID, there was a game that became really popular online called Among Us. And essentially multiple players log in and you get to be assigned as a member of a crew on a spaceship. And your goal is to carry out certain tasks to keep the spaceship rolling. But there's one person who is randomly assigned the job of the imposter. And the imposter's job is actually to sabotage the rest of the crew and actually murder them to prevent their mission from taking place. And so when you play this game, you see a screen like this that typically says, there is one imposter among us. And I saw this picture and it was flipping it a little bit. It says there are 0 crewmates among us, implying that or suggesting that all of the players are really an imposter in some way or another. And my hope today is to convince you that indeed we are all imposters, at least to some extent in our careers. So let's start by defining what imposter syndrome is. The term imposter phenomenon was first coined in 1978 in a paper by Clance and Imes. And they had described certain traits and certain behaviors of high achieving individuals who really had a hard time struggling with and internalizing their own level of success. And in that paper, they described all sorts of feelings of fraudulence amongst the people in the study. They thought they believed that their work was unworthy of praise. They attributed their success to things like serendipity, being in the right place at the right time, luck, charm, being able to fake it, right? Fake it till you make it. Sometimes you heard the old saying. And really what imposter syndrome is at its core, it's just a warped idea of what constitutes a high level of competency. And what's really horrible about imposter syndrome is that the symptoms feed into that sense of inadequacy and vice versa, feeds back into the syndrome. And so it's really a vicious circle for a lot of people who deal with this. Some of the symptoms of people with imposter syndrome or imposter phenomenon include people who overwork. They tend to be perfectionists, and they have difficulty asking for help when they need it. And essentially what they're doing with these symptoms is they're trying to maintain this facade, this belief that they are not as competent as people think they are. And they're trying to meet some unsustainable standards that they believe that they can't keep up with. So it becomes a constant battle to prove yourself, but not raise that bar too high at the same time. People with the syndrome have a lot of discomfort in accepting praise for their own work. They tend to use a lot of these like involuntary disclaimers. Say you're giving a talk and saying, oh, I just put this together last night kind of thing. Don't expect too much, right? Or they may use some self-deprecating humor like I did in telling you that I can't even spell psychology. I can spell psychology. I have spell check, so I can at least do that. And again, these activities or these symptoms, really what it's about is to lower that bar, to lower the expectations so that you're not going to blow up this facade that you think you have created. And then lastly, there's a reluctancy to step up sometimes to very visible roles or visible tasks. And there's oftentimes procrastination involved. And these things are really, what you're doing is you're avoiding judgment, right? If you put it off, you put it off, you put it off, you're avoiding judgment. If you don't do it in the first place, you're avoiding that judgment. So doing things, like giving a talk on imposter syndrome when you have imposter syndrome is a big deal, right? Imposters also seem to have a very, it's a false perception of their own abilities. And yet somehow they're still very, very aware of how others perceive them, right? So you may not think of yourself as being very capable and very accomplished and competent, but you do recognize that those around you see you in that light. People, imposters also have really an inability to self-assess. And we compare ourselves to some illusionary idea of what competency is. And if you think about it, most of the time when we see the work of other people, we're only seeing the finished products of their labor, right? We're not seeing all the years of practice and study. We're not seeing the trials and tribulations. We're not seeing them fail over and over again. We just see the success. And it appears to us that everyone else seems to, do it easily, right? It becomes natural, becomes easy to them. And underneath it all, we know that's not the case. We know that there's struggle involved to make something, make a product that good. But we don't see that and we don't recognize that. And there could also be a lot of physical manifestations. Anxiety, stress, and depression are all associated with imposter syndrome, and even substance abuse in extreme cases. So I'm going to ask you guys a question, and I want you guys to know that this is a safe, open space for us to be honest, and this will only work if we're honest with one another. So what I want to ask you is, how many of you, and you can put this in the chat or you can raise your hand or whatever, how many of you believe that you have suffered from imposter syndrome on a fairly regular basis throughout your career? I wish I could see my chat. How can I see my chat? I'm seeing a lot of hands being waved right now. Yeah. And let me ask a second follow-up question. How many of you believe that you have experienced imposter syndrome as part of your capacity here at Highlands? Yeah, a lot. And as a matter of fact, first of all, thank you guys for being honest and open. I really appreciate that. Fact of the matter is that it's between 70 and 90% of people who respond yes to those kinds of questions. And the reality is probably closer to 100% that actually do feel that way. And some of them just don't want to admit to it, I guess. So when I knew I was going to give this talk, I did a very, very scientific study. I posted it on Facebook. Okay, I posted a question, same question I asked you guys just now. I was just curious, really, mostly. I said, how many of you at one point or another have suffered from imposter syndrome? The feeling that you are a fraud and don't know what you're doing at work, school, whatever, despite your record of accomplishment. And I was shocked. I mean, within seconds of posting this, my Facebook just went nuts. Bing, 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 just over and over again. Yes, that would be me. Yes, yes, all the time. Well said, every day. My guess is everyone, most definitely. Hits me when I have huge new responsibilities at work. There's some more. Yep, daily, pretty near everyone at some point. Count me in. All the time, been in the field 15 years. Surely, just about every day. Throughout my life, sometimes I would feel like a yo-yo. I remember first years of teaching was full of imposter syndrome. Each day I'd go home less confident of my skills. This response, the quickness of this response and the intensity and the honesty of this response, really, really struck me. And it felt good to feel that, I wasn't alone in this. And I hope that some of these people felt the same way, and some of you feel the same way already by knowing that you are not alone in this. This is a real thing. So, imposter phenomenon.
Kelly,
Yes.
sorry, just real quick. There's a couple of hands raised. Are there questions, or are those still just raised from the poll? I just want to make sure we don't miss anybody.
Mm-hmm.
If there's not questions, you just have to click the little lower hand button in the reactions. Okay, I guess we're good.
Awesome, thank you. So when I was looking at this list of individuals, of course, I blotted out their names to for their own sake of privacy. But when I looked at those individuals, most of them were people of higher ed, first of all, well-educated people. A large number of people with PhDs, medical degrees, law degrees, other professional degrees, people whom I admire and respect tremendously, who I think do fantastic work and do so that in a way that seems effortless. People who I think would be described unequivocally as being successful and accomplished. We're talking college administrators and professors, medical professionals, people who work for powerful companies in very visible roles, successful business owners and leaders in different government agencies. I was a little taken back, I'll be honest with you, at that little very non-scientific poll that I did on Facebook. And so it prompted me to dig a little deeper, and I had found actually that there are a lot of well-accomplished people, famous people, are also not immune to this. Michelle Obama once said, "I don't know if the world should take me seriously. I'm just Michelle Robinson, that little girl on the South Side who went to public school." Albert Einstein described himself as an involuntary swindler, thinking that his work was held in some sort of exaggerated esteem. Maya Angelou, I've written 11 books, but each time I think, uh-oh, they're going to find me out. I've run a game on everybody and they're going to find me out. And the list of people was enormous. Meryl Streep, Sheryl Sandberg, CEO of Facebook, Sonia Sotomayor, the Supreme Court Justice, and many, many others. So the well-accomplished are definitely not immune to this. And then since that initial 1978 paper, there's been a tremendous amount of studies looking at imposter syndrome in higher ed. Studies that have focused on faculty, other studies that have focused on students, both undergraduate medical professional students and graduate students, and even staff and administrative. There have been studies done on all of this. There's one quote from one of these studies by David Zorn in 2005 says, "Scholarly isolation, aggressive competitiveness, disciplinary nationalism," I'm still not sure what that means. Maybe somebody could help me clarify that. "And lack of mentoring and valuation of product over process are rooted in the university culture." And I think this statement is so, so true. I think that the academy breeds imposter syndrome just by the nature of what we do. And they also looked in some of these studies at certain personality traits of people like you and I who are attracted to higher ed careers. And they found that those traits are closely aligned to factors that contribute to imposter syndrome. And of course, the setting itself, the university setting, is conducive to feelings of self-doubt. And I was hoping we could brainstorm at this point. If you could maybe, I don't know, I can't read the chat, maybe Ben could read them off for me. What personality traits do you think that we carry into higher ed careers that could lead to imposter tendencies? And also, what about the setting of the academy contributes to feelings of self-doubt?
Yeah, I can read some of these as they come across, as they come up. Neuroticism, conscientiousness, perfectionism, being introverted. We know just enough to know how much we don't know. Self-doubt, constant evaluation within role of academia, elitist environment, not seeing anybody who looks like me, gatekeeping culture, social comparisons, systemic expectations of high level expertise. I might have missed a couple.
That's great. That's awesome. I appreciate that. And I think all of those are true. I'm going to show you some of the ones that came out of these studies that match, a lot of them match to what was said. If I can get back to it, there we are. One of the traits of people who go into higher ed is we tend to be highly conscientious, right? We want to do a good job. We want to do the best job that we can do. We tend to be overachievers. We tend to be on the more perfectionist side of the spectrum. And we have, you know, ideas that we want to make lasting contributions to the fields that we study in. Those are some of the traits that came up in those studies. And I think you could imagine how some of those things could lead to imposter tendencies. And then as far as the settings of academia, extremely hyper competitive and sometimes hostile in that competitiveness. We are actually trained in academia to critically evaluate our own work and the work of others. So we condition ourselves to be hard on ourselves and others sometimes. We love in academia passionate debate. We have very strong beliefs, but mixed into that is a little dash of cognitive dissonance, right? And we don't like letting go of beliefs, and that can lead to that hostility that sometimes presents itself. I've seen that time and time again in scientific conferences I've gone to where people tear each other apart. And then we're often put in the spotlight in many different ways in academia. And that exposure is, that's hard for the person who suffers from imposter syndrome. Being questioned by students, by colleagues, all the time, giving talks, going to conferences and whatnot. They also found in a couple studies that faculty with imposter syndrome have, they actually reduce their availability for student advising, supervision, and research activities. And of course, I don't mean to generalize here. These are just, this is some anecdotal evidence in these studies, and certainly not saying that if you have imposter syndrome, this is the case with you. But they had found that a lot of faculty with imposter syndrome did not make themselves available for such things. They tended to lecture more in an effort to reduce those kinds of interactions that might lead to exposure. Same thing with avoiding questions. And they found that they had reduced research activities, reduced publication record, reduced visibility and for like presentations at conferences and things of that nature. So it can be really debilitating to those who work in higher ed. It can be maybe not debilitating, but it can be limiting to how high a bar they could reach if they weren't afflicted with it. Some of the studies on students were really, really interesting. It was found that the imposter phenomenon was documented across a wide array of different majors and disciplines. It was a bit more prominent in STEM, science, technology, engineering, math, and the arts. Actually, I found was a little bit surprising, but maybe not. Had a high degree of imposter syndrome. It was found in both undergraduate students and graduate students. It was certainly heightened in populations of non-traditional students or returning students, and that makes a lot of sense. If you imagine you're returning to college after a number of years, you have children and you're taking classes here and there to try and get back into school, that's breeding ground for self-doubt. One thing that was interesting is that students with imposter tendencies had higher degree of academic success. And I guess that makes sense. If these are your overachievers, these are your perfectionists, these are the hard workers, then they're going to do better academically. But at what cost, right? One's mental health, one's well-being is vastly, in my book, more important than academic success. They also found that those students were less likely to participate in academic dishonesty, cheating, plagiarism, those kinds of things. So they wanted to do the work, and they wanted to do the work honestly. But they also felt that they were not worthy of the level of success that they had achieved nonetheless. The imposter syndrome is also a predictor of mental health problems, mostly anxiety problems and depression. It is, somebody had pointed out, I think in that last question, being the odd person out, right? There is a bias or there is a correlation between imposter syndrome and being an ethnic or racial minority or another minority. Like one that we hear of all the time are women in science. They're a minority in STEM disciplines. And that kind of singling out breeds imposter syndrome. And then first generation college students also deal with this a lot. Okay, how do we personally overcome these feelings? Well, first of all, we break the silence. And I'm not talking about the Japanese K-pop band. What I'm talking about, I'm sure they're very good, by the way. It's not my thing, but I'm sure they're very good. We need to stop internalizing it, right? What we're doing today is breaking the silence. We need to recognize that it only seems like everyone is extremely competent and confident. You've seen from our little poll today, that's not the case. We need to build alliances. You would really be surprised how supportive and empathetic your colleagues can be. I've talked to one colleague in particular. I won't tell you who he is, but who's been really supportive and empathetic with this. We need to separate feelings from fact. Feeling like a fraud, quote unquote fraud, does not mean that you are. And we also need to recognize that depending on the situation, you may actually be on the receiving end of some sort of social stereotype within a group, right? You've heard the people say things like, yeah, you're pretty good at math for a girl, right? These kind of backhanded compliments are they're so divisive, and they're so damaging to people who already may have tendencies for imposter syndrome. We need to accentuate the positive and eliminate the negative, right? I love this one right here. Don't equate expertise with infallibility. Allow yourself the freedom to be both. We can be experts at what we do. We can be very good at what we do and still make mistakes. Accept that and own it. You need to celebrate your accomplishments, record them, review them. One paper I read recommended that you actually try to look at your accomplishments from somebody else's perspective. Imagine if somebody was going to write you a letter of recommendation. What would they say about your accomplishments? And if you look at it that way, it's much more freeing, I think. Also, be able to let go of the times where you may not have been at your best, right? This is about self-forgiveness. This is about establishing a growth mindset, recognizing that when we do make mistakes, that is an opportunity for us to do better the next time. But it doesn't impact us as human beings, right? It's not part of us. Try to rewrite that internal monologue. Recognize that your words influence how you think, and also work to eliminate those disclaimers from your vocabulary when you are in situations where you are exposed. And then lastly, allow yourself to take risks. We know that changes in behavior are often precede a boost in confidence, right? If you don't take those risks, if you don't take those chances, then you're not going to ever work through it. So ask more questions, take on new tasks, new responsibilities. Okay, and I have one last question for you guys, which I think is a really important one here, and something that we have some control over here at Highlands if we choose to take control of it. What are some ways that we can build an institution that does not cultivate imposter syndrome? And I have managed to get my chat up, so you can either write them in the chat or scream them out loud.
Kelly, if I could just kind of start off with that, I think that it's important to understand the way that culture impacts, or the institutional culture, how it impacts the way that that's developed. Some of these students may be coming in with that before they even step foot on campus, because that's what K-12 education to potentially breed as well. So identifying what imposter syndrome is, understanding that there are ways to cope with it, anxiety, and having open conversations about what imposter syndrome what it is and what it could potentially do to impact students' mental health. Because we all want those high achieving students, but at what cost?
Mm-hmm. No, that's absolutely true. I would say nearly all the students who come here have experienced imposter syndrome. They're coming with it. So it's when I say that higher ed breeds it, I don't mean that it didn't already exist. I'm just saying that it's cultivating it in a certain way. But you're right, we need to be open about it. We need to talk about it. I'm seeing people, I realized that K-pop stands for Korean pop. Sorry about that. I learned something. Let's see, somebody says, encourage students instead of putting them down. Absolutely. Promote mentoring for faculty. Educate the students and faculty on this as we're doing here, right? This is a good step towards making a change, what we're doing today. Celebrate people, acknowledge people, normalize it. Have diverse faculty and staff actively, vocally supporting the success of students and their colleagues. Absolutely. Self-confidence. acknowledge successes more frequently. Helps when instructors tell students that they belong here and that they can do the work. This is something that I practice frequently, right? Students flat out tell me they don't feel they belong here, and I try to convince them otherwise. I know Leon does that kind of work with students, first year experience as well. Making this a normal feeling instead of denying it, right? It's not a weakness. Validation, celebrate complementary strengths. You guys are spot on. Let me see a new one. Applying an asset-based lens to all of our students and the funds of knowledge they bring to the classroom. Cultural, linguistic. Absolutely. We all have unique things that we are bringing to the table, and we need to recognize those and celebrate those gifts. I threw a few of them down here, and I think you guys have hit on some of those. If I get back to the top, yeah. So it's encouraging others. That's the theme that came up often in that chat. Try to discourage that hostility and bickering that can sometimes happen in our debate. Here's a huge one. Admit when you're wrong. It's so hard for us to do, isn't it? It really is hard for us to admit when we're wrong. We don't want to be wrong, but how important it is to show by example that we are fallible to those, we mentor. Be more welcoming, right? Remove barriers to participation so that those opportunities to grow and learn from experience are available to students and faculty and staff alike. Choose your words carefully when you're critiquing work. And then I think everybody here this year is going to have the privilege and the responsibility of mentoring people this year. Be a mentor in the true sense of the word. This was a comment in my little scientific poll from a student who graduated here from Highlands. I'm not going to tell you who they are, but the person says, still suffering from it, and I'm afraid and likely will for the next year or so. This is a student who is very high performing, who graduated and is moving on to some really great things, great opportunities that this person's going into. And I responded to her, just know that most people suffer from it too, even your professors and mentors who are well accomplished. Academia breeds it. See all the people above to admit to it, and there's many people she knew on that list. While it may not go away, you can manage it and persevere. Allow yourself to celebrate your accomplishments as they come and let go of the times when you didn't shine your brightest. You got this. Our students need to hear this. The people we mentor need to hear this. If you're a senior faculty, you need to mentor the junior faculty. They need to hear things like this. Okay, so with that, I will, there's some funny cartoons here I'd like you to read, but I'd be happy to answer any questions or hear any comments from you guys.
Kelly, as a way to kind of normalize these things, I think, hearing people's stories is also very important. I know that for this, the summer's been really challenging, of course, prepping, getting ready. But there were two moments I remember where I got 2 emails and they were accomplishments. And I remember I thought to myself, why am I receiving this? This is not, this is incorrect. I remember I was visibly angry that I received these compliments. And it's just, those moments are very powerful, and it becomes, when we experience the imposter syndrome, that's just kind of a default reaction that we have. So stepping away and having that inner dialogue is very important. So I'm just kind of curious what kind of recommendations you would give us to help modify that inner dialogue to be a little bit more mindful that, you know, it's okay to acknowledge that, you know, you may feel bad, but like you deserve it at the same time.
Yeah, I wish I had an easy answer for that. It just takes practice. And first is just recognizing it, right? You recognize it when you're doing it to yourself, right? When you are falling into that mindset, and taking a moment, reflect on it, say, why am I feeling this way? And logically go through it, right? Like I did when I was nervous about, getting this talk accepted. Who am I? I'm not a psychologist to give this talk. But yeah, in reality, yeah, I know a thing or two about this topic. I've lived it. These students I work with every day, I understand it very well. So you just talk yourself through it. So again, a lot of you, if you have that opportunity and privilege to mentor, take it seriously, right? And this is something that you can practice and hopefully make better on campus.
Thanks so much, Kelly. I'll go ahead and stop the recording here, but we do still have time. So I think